Then we got another call. So Mr. Landis passed on with Mr. Buckles by himself. And then I got a call from a friend of mine at the Guinness Book of World Records that said, did you know that there is a German World War I veteran living in secrecy in San Francisco? I said, here we go again. So at this point, my charge cards were pretty maxed out from this wonderful adventure of history. So located another charge card and booked a flight to San Fran, and there we were. William Seeger was drafted by the German army because it was so desperate at the end of World War I. He was drafted about the age of 14 or 15. We're going to talk about the conditions of Germany a little bit as we advance through the show, but basically, in a snapshot, Germany was so decimated towards the end of the war, they were eating the dead horses off the side of the road for food. So they drafted him. So what he's clutching is his draft papers in his right, or on stage right, his left hand, his mobilization orders from the German Empire, and his American citizenship papers. What he did is he abandoned the German army and fled home because he was only about 14 or 15. And when he made it to home, they were so fearful of what would happen with him that he went back and got assigned to guarding American prisoners and acting as a clerk. He didn't like what he saw in Germany. He immediately began saving the money and begging money. In 1919, he fled to the United States of America, worked his way towards becoming an American citizen, the very country he fought against in World War I. Worked as a pressman in Philadelphia, thus his Philadelphia Inquirer of The Man Walks on the Moon behind him. But he lived by himself, and he had no Veterans Affairs benefits, obviously, because he served for the enemy during World War I. But he lived by himself, and then his daughter eventually moved in with him, and I've got his orders back in my office. So, pretty incredible fellow. When I was photographing him, just off topic a little bit, but as I was photographing him, the shutter of my camera was shooting noise. He said, that really sounds like machine gun fire from World War I. So I thought that was kind of an interesting moment. So now we're going across the pond over to England, and this is William Stone. William Stone served in both World War I and World War II. He witnessed the scuttling of the fleet, which we'll get to here in a little bit, which was at the end of World War I. Was on the HMS Hood, I believe, or the RMS Hood. But behind him you can see some pretty interesting photos. It's him with the Queen. I think Tony Blair's in there. It was almost, I don't use this word in a bad way, but it was almost poisonous for me to go to England and see how they honored their World War I veterans, because it's been an incredible fight in America to progress the campaign for honor for World War I veterans. And I'll walk you through that as we go, but in England it was second nature. It was like breathing as to how they treated their World War I veterans. And it was just an incredible moment. But to see him and to talk with him, he was just a cheerful, wonderful man. So Harry Patch transformed my life. I've been documenting veterans for nearly 20 years now. And Harry Patch fought in the Battle of Passchendaele and was wounded, I believe it was in 1916, so nearly 100 years ago. And he had in a German artillery shell land in the foxhole or the trench near him, which blew up and completely vaporized, gone, 3 of his crew members from his Lewis gun team. And he had a piece of shrapnel about the size of my remote control here that was lodged in his groin. So the wounds and casualties from the Battle of Passchendaele, it went on for months, approached 1 million. And they were so decimated that they had no medicine. So they said to Mr. Patch, we can either let you die or we're going to take the shrapnel out without any medicine. So with that, they took the piece of shrapnel out and continued to explain that to me, which was just a profound moment. But at the age of 110, he lived to be 111, but at the age of 109 or 110 when I interviewed him, I was warned to not talk about the topic of war with him because it was so devastating. You just cannot describe with words World War I. All of the wars are horrible, but World War I, it was just such a depth of hell. So he had just written a book, and we were sitting in his room in Wells, England, and I said, let's just look through your book. And we got to the halfway point, which was halfway through his life, or part of the life in the book, and he approached the topic of war, and he went into a comatose, or almost a PTSD moment, where we sat in silence in his room in Wells, England, and he stared out the window, and immediately, nearly 100 years after the war, he was brought back to the trenches of World War I. So he talked about the stacking and the mud in the trenches. They would stack ammo crates in the bottom of the trenches, and it would rain, and mud would deepen, and they'd stack another ammo box on top, until eventually the ammo boxes were about this deep into the bottom of the trenches. When he was wounded in the Battle of Passchendaele, they took him out and brought him into a delicing bath. And they dropped him into this delicing bath, and he recalled being pulled out of the delicing bath and the bottom of the bathtub being completely covered in ice, the conditions of the trenches. Henry Allingham was the biplane pilot and mechanic. Ironically, his grandson worked across the street from me in Grand Rapids, Michigan, here, Grand Rapids, and he helped set up and facilitate the English trip for me. But Mr. Allingham was a mechanic, and he would frequently hop in the back seat of the biplanes. And if you're not familiar with the biplanes, for the older generation, we understand, but they had no cockpits. They basically were open air. And he would sit in the back seat with a bushel basket between his knees. Anybody have any idea what was in the bushel basket? Bombs, that's right. So he would fly over no man's land and approach the Germans and basically look down and say Guten Tag and, and drop bombs by hands onto the Germans. And his plane ended up crashing in no man's land, and he survived the night in a bomb crater and woke up the next morning with light and saw that the bomb crater was filled with body parts. And he recalled these things vividly as well. The other thing that he told me about that was kind of fascinating was their method of communication. And their method of communication was to take up some homing pigeons or passenger pigeons, and as they'd fly over the trenches, they would make note of where the Germans were, and they'd stuff the note into the bird's leg, and they'd release it from the cockpit, and the bird would fly back, and that was their instant messaging. That was their Twitter feed for the young posse here. So this is me with Mr. Buckles on his porch for NBC Nightly News. Just fascinating man. I remember seeing the reflection in his eyes in the mountains, and him talking about his military lineage. His great-grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War. His other uncles fought in the Civil War, and he, of course, was in World War I and II. And that's the portrait we did for that. So, kind of an interesting story. Mr. Buckles had 3 to 4 run-ins with President Bush. So, Mr. Buckles is a lifelong Democrat. I have now become an independent because of this campaign. And this is his daughter, Susanna. Because he was a prisoner of war in the Philippines during World War II, he didn't start his family till he was about 50 or 55, so his daughter is now about 56. And Susanna become a very good friend. She calls me little brother. I call her big sister. She's going to get me some moonshine when I go out and see her again. They live in the hills of West Virginia. Anyways, she got a call one day from the White House, and as his celebrity status grew, you'll see here in a few minutes just how famous the man became, but she got a call from the White House, and they said, President Bush would like you to stop by the Oval Office and would like the honor of meeting your father. And she says, well, sounds kind of busy, no thank you. So with that, the White House hung up and didn't quite know what to do, I'm sure. So about a month later, she got another call from the White House. President Bush will be speaking 3 miles from your home and would like very much to honor your father at this event at school. And she says, well, it sounds really busy. No, thank you. So as we advanced the portrait collection, I got a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I said, okay, I think we found a spot for the portraits to go, and that's going to be the Pentagon. So we did a tour of the Pentagon, picked out a spot, and then I got a wonderful email from the Department of Veterans Affairs saying, "Dear Mr. DeYoung, the White House would like to know if they've done anything to personally offend the Buckles family and would like to extend an offer to you guys to stop by the Oval Office on your way to the Pentagon." So it was pretty, Simon was there, he was much younger, but it was a pretty incredible time. We had a motorcycle escort once we hit the Beltway and right up to the Oval Office in the West Wing. And I was sitting in the West Wing and they had the painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. And I said to Mr. Buckles, and he was 108 at the time, I said to Mr. Buckles, I said, "Oh, there's Mr. Washington crossing the Potomac." And he looked up and he says, "I believe that's the Delaware." Like, thank you for correcting American history in the West Wing with me, Mr. Buckles. So this is us meeting in the Oval Office, and the clock over here is built right down in Zealand. It's a Herman Miller clock. So kind of fun.